The INFJ communication style that confuses everyone. Talking to an INFJ can feel different. Not distant. Not unfriendly. But layered. You might leave a conversation thinking, I feel like they said a lot, without actually saying much. Or maybe you felt this. You explained something clearly, logically, step by step. And the INFJ responds with something emotional, symbolic, or strangely abstract. And suddenly, you're both talking, but not on the same level. INFJs don't struggle to communicate. They just speak a language most people were never taught to hear. And because of that, INFJs are often misunderstood, misread, or seen as mysterious when they're simply communicating in a different dimension. Today, we're exploring the INFJ communication style that confuses almost everyone, including the INFJs themselves. INFJs are often called deep, intuitive, or complex. But those words don't explain what actually happens when they try to express themselves. Because INFJ communication is not just about words. It's about meaning, emotional undercurrents, subtle cues, unspoken context. When INFJs speak, they're rarely just sharing information. They're sharing what something means, how it feels, where it might lead, what it says about the people involved. And when others respond only to the surface words, INFJs feel unseen, and the other person feels confused. This mismatch creates one of the most common INFJ struggles. I explain myself, but people still don't understand what I mean. Let's break down why. 1. INFJs speak in meanings, not just facts. Most communication styles focus on what happened, what needs to be done, what is logically correct. INFJs communicate differently. They focus on why it mattered, how it felt, what it represents, what it might become. So when an INFJ says, that situation felt off, they aren't just describing discomfort. They're referencing energy shifts, unspoken tension, behavior patterns, emotional inconsistencies. But because they summarize all that into one sentence, others think they're being vague. They're not vague. They're compressing emotional and intuitive data into language that only makes full sense to them. 2. INFJs filter their words before speaking. INFJs rarely say the first version of what they feel. They run it through internal filters. Is this fair? Is this kind? Is this necessary? Will this hurt someone? By the time they actually speak, their original emotion has been softened, edited, and translated. So others hear a calm sentence, but they don't hear the emotional storm that existed before it. This makes INFJs appear measured, but also hard to read, because what they say is only a fraction of what they felt. 3. INFJs assume others hear subtext. INFJs are highly attuned to what is not being said. Tone changes, facial microexpressions, pauses, energy shifts. They read all of it automatically. So when INFJs speak, they often assume others are doing the same. They imply instead of state. They hint instead of declare. They soften instead of confront. They think they're being clear. But others miss the emotional subtext completely. And INFJs walk away thinking, I told them how I felt, while the other person thinks, they never said anything was wrong. This is where the confusion begins. INFJs are not poor communicators. They are multi-layered communicators in a world trained to listen only to literal words. And the gap between those two styles creates misunderstanding on both sides. But it goes deeper. Because sometimes, INFJs don't just speak differently. They hold back entire parts of their message. Why INFJs speak in emotional layers that others don't catch. INFJs rarely speak in straight lines. They speak in layers. Not because they want to be mysterious. Not because they enjoy being misunderstood. But because their inner experience is never one-dimensional. They simultaneously perceive the emotional atmosphere, the unspoken motivations, the possible long-term effects, the deeper meaning behind the moment. And when they try to talk about it, all of that depth tries to come out at once. So they compress it, simplify it, translate it. But something always gets lost in translation. 1. INFJs experience conversations emotionally first. Before INFJs process what was said, They process how it felt. The tone, the energy, the shift in someone's expression. If someone says, "I'm fine," but their voice tightens slightly, the INFJ doesn't hear "fine." They hear, "Something's wrong." They're holding back. They don't feel safe enough to say it. But when INFJs respond to that emotional undercurrent instead of the literal words, others get confused. "Why are you acting like something's wrong?" "I said I'm fine." And the INFJ feels disoriented. Because to them, the emotional layer was louder than the words. 2. INFJs try to communicate the meaning, not just the event. If you ask an INFJ how their day was, they won't just tell you what happened. They'll tell you what it meant, how it shifted something inside them, why it made them reflect on a pattern. They might say, "Today made me realize I've been ignoring my own needs." To them, that's the most important part. But others might respond, "Oh, okay. But what actually happened?" This is the communication gap. INFJs are trying to share internal movement. Others are listening for external details. Both are communicating, but on different dimensions. 3. INFJs speak in emotional summaries. Because INFJs process so much internally, they often speak in condensed emotional conclusions. They say, "This doesn't feel right. I feel distant lately. Something's been off between us." These are not random feelings. They are the result of weeks of observation, emotional pattern tracking, subtle shifts in behavior, unspoken tension building slowly. But because INFJs present the conclusion instead of the full mental journey, others think it came out of nowhere. And the INFJ is left thinking, "How did you not see this building the whole time?" 4. INFJs struggle to explain intuition logically. INFJs often know something without being able to explain exactly how. They sense inauthenticity, emotional disconnection, future consequences. But when asked, "How do you know that?" they freeze. Because their answer is, "I just feel it. I've noticed patterns. It's subtle, but it's there." And in a world that values concrete proof, that answer sounds weak. So INFJs stop trying to explain. And the other person walks away thinking the INFJ is overthinking, imagining things, or being dramatic. When in reality, they picked up on something real, just too subtle to put into simple language. 5. INFJs leave emotional breadcrumbs instead of direct statements. INFJs rarely confront bluntly unless pushed to a breaking point. Instead, they communicate discomfort through tone shifts, shorter replies, quieter energy, less emotional availability. To them, this is communication. They're signaling, "Something feels wrong. I'm overwhelmed. I'm hurt." But unless someone is emotionally perceptive, those signals are missed. And INFJs feel even more misunderstood. Because they think, "I've been showing you something's wrong for weeks," while the other person says, "You never told me." This layered, emotional, intuitive style of communication is beautiful, but fragile. It works wonderfully with emotionally aware people. But with literal thinkers or emotionally avoidant people, it creates confusion, frustration, and emotional distance. And this leads to the next piece of the puzzle. INFJs often end up saying less than they truly feel. Not because they don't care, but because they're tired of translating a language few people seem to understand. Why INFJs say less than they feel? INFJs are not silent because they have nothing to say. They are silent because they have too much to say, and not enough certainty it will be understood. Over time, many INFJs learn a subtle but powerful lesson. Explaining their full emotional reality often leads to confusion, dismissal, or emotional overload in others. So they begin to edit themselves. Not consciously at first, but gradually, carefully, quietly. 1. INFJs pre-process their feelings before speaking. When something emotional happens, INFJs don't react immediately. They go inward. They analyze. What am I really feeling? Why am I feeling this? Is this fair? Is this projection? Is this worth bringing up? By the time they're ready to talk, days may have passed. The emotion has softened. The urgency has faded. the words feel less necessary. So instead of expressing the original depth, they give a smaller version. I was just a little off that day. What they don't say. That moment triggered a deep fear of being misunderstood and emotionally disconnected. But that feels too big, too intense, too hard to unpack. So they simplify. And something true remains unspoken. 2. INFJs are afraid of being emotionally misinterpreted. INFJs feel emotions in complex combinations. They can feel hurt and understanding at the same time, disappointed but compassionate, angry but still loving. But when they try to express this emotional nuance, people often reduce it to something simpler. You're just upset. You're overthinking. You're being too sensitive. This hurts more than the original issue. So INFJs start thinking, maybe it's safer not to say everything. And silence begins to feel safer than being misunderstood. 3. INFJs don't want to be an emotional burden. INFJs are hyper-aware of emotional weight. They know when someone is tired, stressed, overwhelmed. So when they are hurting, they often think, they have enough on their plate. I don't want to make this heavier. I'll deal with it myself. They rarely say, I really need someone to sit with me in this. Because they've learned to be the strong one, the listener, the emotional support system. And switching roles feels uncomfortable, even when they need it most. 4. INFJs wait for the right moment that rarely comes. INFJs don't like emotional interruptions. They don't want to bring up something deep when the timing feels wrong. So they wait. For calm. For privacy. For emotional openness. But life is rarely perfectly timed. So the moment passes. And the feeling gets stored instead of shared. Weeks later, it feels too old to bring up. So it becomes part of the quiet emotional backlog INFJs carry. 5. INFJs communicate indirectly, then feel unheard. Sometimes INFJs do express how they feel, but softly, gently, carefully. They say, I've just been a little overwhelmed lately. I feel like something's been different. I'm not sure, but something feels off. They hope the other person will lean in, ask more, notice the doorway they just opened. But often, the response is, I'm sure it'll be fine. You're probably just tired. Don't worry about it. And the doorway closes. So INFJs stop opening them as often. 6. INFJs don't want to hurt people with their truth. INFJs understand how words land emotionally. They can feel the impact of honesty before they even speak it. So they ask themselves, will this damage the relationship? Will this make them feel rejected? Will this create pain I can avoid? And sometimes, they choose silence not because they lack courage, but because they care too much about emotional consequences. They would rather carry discomfort quietly than risk hurting someone they love. The result, a quiet emotional buildup. Over time, all the unsaid things don't disappear. They accumulate, not as resentment, but as emotional weight. INFJs become quieter, more internal, more distant from their own voice. And people start to think, they're just calm. They don't get upset easily. They're easygoing, not realizing how much emotional processing is happening beneath the surface. So INFJs speak in layers, feel more than they say, and hold back more than people realize. And this leads to one of the biggest misunderstandings of all. INFJs are often seen as cold, distant, or hard to read, when the truth is the complete opposite. Why INFJs are misread as cold, vague, or emotionally distant. INFJs are deeply emotional, but many people don't see that. Instead, they see quiet, reserved, hard to read, sometimes distant, and they assume they don't feel as much. They're emotionally closed off. They're hard to connect with. But the truth is almost the opposite. INFJs are not emotionally shallow. They are emotionally protected. 1. INFJs show emotion internally first. When something affects an INFJ, the reaction doesn't explode outward. It moves inward. They process before they express. They analyze before they react. They sit with feelings until they understand them. To the outside world, this looks like calmness. But internally, there can be hurt, confusion, emotional waves, deep reflection. People expect visible emotion to equal depth. INFJs often feel deeply, quietly, and quiet emotion is easy to misread as no emotion at all. 2. INFJs don't perform their feelings. Some people express emotions loudly, visibly, immediately. INFJs don't perform emotion for reassurance. They don't cry to prove they're hurt. They don't raise their voice to prove they care. Their emotional life is private and internal. So when they say, "I'm okay," it may mean, "I'm processing. I'm protecting the space. I'm not ready to open this yet." But others here, they don't care that much. This misunderstanding creates emotional distance that INFJs never intended. 3. INFJs pause before responding, and it's misread. INFJs think before they speak, especially during conflict or emotional conversations. They pause, reflect, choose words carefully. But in fast, emotionally reactive situations, that pause can feel like withdrawal. Others may think, "Why aren't you reacting? Why don't you have anything to say? Are you shutting down?" In reality, the INFJ is trying to respond with care instead of impulse. But because their processing is silent, it looks like emotional absence. 4. INFJs avoid dramatic conflict, which looks like detachment. INFJs dislike emotional chaos. They don't enjoy yelling matches. They don't thrive in explosive arguments. So when conflict rises, they often soften their tone, step back, choose fewer words, or go quiet to prevent escalation. They're trying to keep emotional safety intact. But others may interpret this as, they don't want to fight for the relationship. They're not emotionally invested. They're avoiding the issue. When really, INFJs are trying to protect the emotional connection from damage. 5. INFJs hide vulnerability until they feel safe. INFJs don't open their emotional core quickly, not because they lack feelings, but because they feel things too deeply to expose them carelessly. Trust, for an INFJ, is emotional safety. Until they feel truly safe, they show the thoughtful side, the supportive side, the calm side, but not the raw, fragile parts. Others see the composed exterior and assume that's all there is. They don't realize there's a whole emotional universe behind the curtain, waiting for safety before it steps forward. 6. INFJs withdraw when overwhelmed. When INFJs are emotionally overloaded, they don't explode. They retreat. They become quieter, more internal, less expressive. This isn't punishment. It isn't manipulation. It's self-protection. But to someone who doesn't understand, it can feel like emotional distance or rejection. The INFJ isn't pulling away from the person. They're pulling inward to regulate their overwhelmed emotional system. The core misunderstanding: INFJs are often seen as emotionally distant because their emotions are deep, internal, and carefully guarded. They don't lack feeling. They lack environments where their full emotional depth feels safe to express. So they stay measured, contained, quiet, and the world mistakes emotional depth for emotional absence. But here's where everything changes. Because ENFJs do communicate love. They do communicate hurt. They do communicate truth. Just not in the loud, obvious ways people expect. To truly understand INFJ communication, you have to learn the language beneath the words. How INFJs actually communicate love, conflict, and emotional truth. INFJs may confuse people. They may seem quiet, distant, or vague. But their communication is intentional. Not careless. Not absent. Not indifferent. It is deeply purposeful, layered with emotion, intuition, and subtle meaning. Understanding it requires patience, attention, and emotional sensitivity. 1. INFJs communicate love through actions, not words. INFJs don't always say, "I love you," in ways others expect. Instead, they show love by listening deeply when you speak, remembering the small things you mention in passing, protecting your emotional safety, sacrificing their comfort for your well-being. They may not always verbalize affection overtly, but their love is constant and tangible. To an INFJ, showing love isn't just a sentiment, it's an action. A presence, a subtle form of communication that says, I see you. I understand you. You are safe with me. If you miss these signals, you might think the INFJ is emotionally unavailable. But in reality, their love is woven quietly into every interaction. 2. INFJs communicate conflict carefully. INFJs dislike conflict, not because they avoid truth, but because they deeply understand emotional consequences. When something is wrong, they observe before reacting, process internally before speaking, choose words that minimize harm, speak only when it's meaningful. This often makes them appear quiet or distant during tense moments. But every word is deliberate, every pause intentional. They aren't avoiding the problem. They are managing it with emotional intelligence, something many people cannot perceive immediately. 3. INFJs use subtext and emotional cues. INFJs often communicate what they feel without stating it directly. Tone, timing, and subtle gestures carry meaning. A shorter reply may signal stress. A pause may signal thought or hurt. A small gesture of kindness may carry deep affection. If you notice, you can read these cues as clearly as spoken words. If you don't, you may feel confused or excluded. INFJs assume that sensitive people will pick up on these cues naturally, because they themselves do the same with others. 4. INFJs speak truth when it truly matters. INFJs rarely speak without intention. When they do express a deep feeling or truth, it is deliberate. It is considered. It is meaningful. They are not careless with words because words have weight. They communicate only when what they say matters enough to warrant attention. This makes them seem enigmatic, but also wise and profound. 5. INFJs value emotional depth over quantity. INFJs would rather have one meaningful conversation than 10 superficial ones. They don't flood you with chatter. They don't engage in small talk for long. Instead, they ask questions that reveal hidden truths, share insights that connect mind and heart, respond in ways that make you think and feel. To someone who expects casual conversation, this can seem intense or confusing. To someone attuned to emotional layers, it is magical clarity. 6. INFJs communicate through presence. Sometimes, the most important INFJ communication is nonverbal. Sitting silently with someone in need, offering a comforting gesture, maintaining attentive eye contact, listening without interruption. Their presence communicates more than words ever could.